ke au I kalani, ke ka po pilipuka, he lele o ka poni poni hikina, kau ke kai awana au I ka ala apapa, la ia nei lunau ke pupulu o kalani lai, o ka ue e huli alo nei ka ulu e ai, ua ue ie. O mai la ko mala mai ka honua nei ka maoli ola, ua u Hawaiʻi ke oli none, mai ka pina ka velona kala, ka hiko ia I ka I ke mano, ka I ke koli umai o kikilo mai, o ka uno ia o ka pulama, a paama ka I pu ka I ke ai, ua ue ie. E mele no, Hawaiʻi, ua.
The chant that you all just heard is an oli called Ua au Hawaiʻi, and it speaks about Hawaiian enlightenment. And a key aspect about my enlightenment this summer has a lot to do with an activity that I hold dear to my heart: surfing. Now, regardless if any of you have ever tried surfing, I'm sure most of you can imagine how exhilarating of a sport it truly is. The vast ocean before you, the power of the wave behind you, and the stability of the board that lies just below your body. But did you know that surfing can also teach you about citizenship diplomacy? What about international forms of knowledge, or even how to take advantage of an opportunity without losing your cultural identity? At least that's what surfing taught me this summer. I grew up on the island of Oahu, surrounded by the largest expanse of water on Earth, and I was about 8 years old when I first learned how to surf. My dad had this gigantic 10-foot long board, which really looked like a small canoe to me at that age, and less like a surfboard, but that's beside the point. And he would place me at the front of this board, get on behind me, and paddle me out towards the breaking waves. And as soon as my father saw a wave strong enough for me to catch, he'd whip the board around and tell me, "Paddle, Kepa, paddle." And as soon as the lip of the wave touched the back of the board, my dad would launch me into the wave as the whitewash came crashing down. As soon as the wave catches me, I'm at the mercy of its power, and this sense of vulnerability is not only one of the most breathtaking experiences one could ever witness, but also one of the most terrifying. Kind of like my summer internship here in Chicago. But the number one thing my dad always told me as a piece of advice is that if I ever wanted to experience a longer wave ride, and a better one at that, I always had to paddle farther out into the ocean. And with this mindset, I was able to look past my island's sandy shores and wonder what was beyond the ocean horizon. And the thing about surfing is that only about 15% of the time you're actually catching the wave, whereas the other 85% of the time you're just paddling out to even reach them in the first place. So you can imagine how far I had to paddle to get here to Chicago. And so I explored my deep curiosity for the world at my internship at World Chicago this summer. World Chicago is a nonprofit that brings together international exchange programs sponsored by the US Department of State. The purpose of these programs is to bring about global understanding through personal face-to-face connections, as well as to promote the city of Chicago as a global center for business, education, and technology. So you can imagine how I thought this was going to be a perfect opportunity for me to paddle further out into the world, and I was going to be living in a city for the first time, collaborating with international visitors, and I expected to meet equally enthusiastic individuals who also want to learn more about the world like I do. So I thought to myself, this is going to be the gnarliest summer ever. Unfortunately, that didn't initially seemed to be the case. About 20 minutes into the first day at my time at World Chicago, a staff member approached me and asked, "Why did I leave Hawaiʻi?" So I told her I always wondered what was out here, and she immediately replied saying, "Nope, it wasn't worth it. You should go back and you shouldn't have come." So you can imagine how discouraged I felt after hearing that. And for the first time since I left home, I asked myself, did I paddle too far out this time? And immediately following that encounter, to make matters a little more interesting, I had to write not just one, but two 12-page itinerary packets for our international visitor leadership programs. And the purpose of these itinerary packets was to have a full schedule of meetings for our delegates while they're staying in Chicago, along with full public transportation rates and an entire direction of how they're supposed to maneuver the third largest city in America. And I remind you, they asked me to do this. I grew up on an island. I don't live in the city. And so I was a little more than drained when I met my first international group the second week of my internship. After about a week of writing itinerary packets, I met the Belarusian delegates who came to our office with a little more disdain than I had felt I would first meet my international group. Most of them couldn't speak English, and they actually had to be escorted by interpreters the entire time they were in Chicago. And on the first day of their stay here, I actually got to take them on a tour of the Chicago Loop. While the delegates were taking pictures in front of the Thompson Center sculpture, one of the language interpreters came up to me and asked why the name of my homeland looked the way that it did. Hawaiʻi. She was curious to know what the strange apostrophe-like symbol in between the eyes at the end of Hawaiʻi meant. So I explained to her, it's called an okina, it's the 13th letter in the Hawaiian alphabet, it's a consonant, and you make a guttural sound when you pronounce it. And although I didn't think much about this exchange, the language interpreter, on the other hand, took it with surprising excitement and wonder. She was shocked to know that saying Hawaii without the okina was exactly like saying Chicago without the C. Didn't make sense to her. So what happened next was even more shocking. The language interpreter gathered the Belarusian delegates around her and said a string of Belarusian sentences. And to my surprise, the 9 Belarusian delegates started to pronounce Hawaii's correct saying in their own mother tongue. And the most important part and the most exciting part that I found about this exchange was the fact that the Belarusian language has a similar guttural sound that they make for certain words. And that is when my horizons of understanding started to expand. So the rest of my time at World Chicago, I would describe as being kind of like me catching this never-ending wave of cross-cultural enlightenment. You see, this powerful wave billowed with the knowledge and lessons that these Belarusian delegates, as well as 2 other international groups, taught me this summer. One from the United Kingdom and another one from Africa. Pictured here are the 9 Belarusian delegates that I was just mentioning, and they taught me about how to increase civic engagement in their own country through non-traditional practices. Next, I met a youth leadership group from London who taught me about the importance of youth empowerment and education on the international scale. And finally, I had the opportunity to network with 40 African women entrepreneurs as they showcased their products and services at the Chicago Cultural Center. Now, although this cross-cultural wave of enlightenment behind me allowed my eyes to see the vast ocean of knowledge before me, the most important part about this ride was actually the wave, the surfboard that I used to catch this wave. You see, the surfboard itself was made of my cultural identity as a kanaka maoli, a native Hawaiian. I was able to obtain international understanding and meet all of these amazing group of people while still standing firmly on my foundation as an indigenous person. And I think this is a lesson that we can all learn from today. Because, especially for you upcoming Kemper scholars, when it comes time for you to catch your own wave of cross-cultural enlightenment, I sure hope that you know how imperative it is to recognize your own foundation and realize what your surfboard can handle. And I think that is pretty enlightening.
Poki e, poki la, poki ka ohu e, poki Hawaiʻi e, ai, ai, ai. Ua u e,